We're a little under a month away from the All-American list coming out, so I thought this would be a good time to give my predictions of who I think will be on the first, second, and third team. I'll start with the third team and work my way up. There were a lot of question marks surrounding Georgia Amoore this season. She was a third-team All-American last year, but now she's playing without Elizabeth Kitley and is in a much more physical conference. She silenced all the doubters. She's averaging 19 points per game and is second in the country in assists at 7 per game with only 3 turnovers. It's very obvious that Georgia put in some crazy work this offseason. She's playing against tougher defenses and was playing without a 3-time ACC Player of the Year, but is putting up career highs. She's leading a Kentucky team that was towards the bottom of their conference last year to elevating them to a top 15 team in the country. That's exactly what an All-American looks like. Not to get too off topic, but I do think she's an underrated draft prospect. She's only 5'6", but her passing ability and off-the-dribble scoring is something I think will translate a lot more than people think. 42% from the field and 33% from three doesn't jump off the page in terms of efficiency, but the shots she takes every game are significantly harder than draft prospects who are the second option or in some cases role players on their respective teams. Gianna Neepkins is having a criminally underrated season because she plays for Utah. She's averaging 19 points on a 50-40-90 shooting split. She would be the only player in NCAA women's history to have this shooting split while averaging at least 10 field goal attempts per game. If she pulls this off, I don't even think it's a debate for her to be an All-American. But even if she just gets close to that, what she's done for Utah is still enough for All-American consideration. With Alyssa Pilley entering the draft and Lynn Roberts leaving to coach the Sparks, it looked like Utah would be completely dead in the water. But Gianna has put this team on her back and will propel them into the tournament. She's my pick for Big 12 Player of the Year. She's scoring on ridiculous efficiency despite being on the top of everyone's scouting report and taking some difficult shots. Yeah, you could argue that Utah isn't a ranked team, but without her, they probably don't even win 15 games. There's not a player in the Big 12 Conference that you could take off a team, and their team would fall off harder than Utah would without Gianna Neepkins. Even with the big loss against UConn, South Carolina is a top 5 team, and Joyce Edwards has been their best player. On the surface, her 13 points and 5 rebounds per game doesn't seem that impressive, but this is on a field goal percentage of 57%, and this is only with an average of 21 minutes per game. I can't think of a player off the top of my head that was an All-American coming off the bench, but Joyce Edwards is clearly an anomaly. It wouldn't shock me at all if they end up going with Tahina Paopao instead, but I do think Joyce would make more sense here. As good as Tahina has been, Joyce can completely take over games and has done that several times this year for South Carolina. I expect her to have a big role in the SEC tournament, which will be a huge factor in All-American voting. Kiki Irifen was a preseason All-First-Team All-American pick. Even though she's not playing up to that standard, it's extremely rare for a player to be a preseason first-team player and not make any of the 3 lists. She's been able to dominate most of the forwards in the Big Ten and has stepped up in games where Juju is struggling with knocking down her shots. Kiki Irifen's situation is very weird. She undeniably had a better season last year compared to this year, but didn't make the list. But more likely than not, she will be named on a team this year. Some people may argue Kiki being an All-American this year would be undeserved, but personally I would have no problem with it, because it was complete nonsense for her not to be there last year. March is going to be a very important month for Kiki, especially from a draft perspective. If she shows up against the best teams, the games she struggled with this year will be overlooked. To say Mikayla Blakes is having a special freshman season would be an understatement. She broke the record for most points scored by a freshman against Florida when she had 53, then broke her own record again against Auburn by scoring 55 points. She's at the top of team scouting reports, and teams still can't stop her. She's already one of the best off-ball scorers in the entire country. She never stops moving, and if the defender makes a mistake, she always punishes it. She's a constant threat cutting to the basket or when she leaks out for a jump shot, and she's just as dangerous on the ball. She's a great shooter off the dribble, and she's a very good driver. It's scary that a freshman already has an offensive game this polished. They'll most likely give Sarah Strong the National Freshman of the Year award because of how good she and UConn has been this season. Personally, I think they should give it to Mikayla Blakes. Sarah has been absolutely incredible this season, but I think Mikayla Blake's dominating the best conference in basketball is more impressive. The coverage she's seeing night in, night out is so much harder. But regardless of how the award goes, Mikayla has been incredible. So for the third team, I have Georgia Amore, Gianna Neepkins, Joyce Edwards, Kiki Irifin, and Mikayla Blakes. The third team is always hardest to predict because there's so many great players that can be substituted instead. But I feel confident about my picks. I'll move on to the second team, starting with Sarah Strong. Sarah Strong was the #1 ranked recruit in the entire country and still found a way to exceed expectations. She's only a freshman and already has a strong argument for being the best forward in the country. I think the saying that a player can play all 5 positions is grossly overused, but in Sarah's case, it's true. She has the shooting, passing, and driving ability of guards, and in a lot of cases even better. She has the rebounding and back-to-the-basket game of power forwards and centers, and she's an amazing interior defender. She's the one player in college where she legitimately does not have a defined position. She's averaging 16 points, 8 rebounds, 3.5 assists on an amazing 57% from the field and 37% from 3. But the stats do not do her justice in terms of how impactful she's been. There were so many times in tough games where she was the go-to player for UConn, even though they had AZ Fudd and Paige Beckers. Aneesah Morrow's nickname is Niece the Beast, and she's living up to the name. She's averaging 18 points per game and is leading the country in rebounds at 14 per game. She's leading the country in double-doubles by a wide margin and is second all-time in career double-doubles, only behind Courtney Paris. Aneesah Morrow has one of the highest, if not the highest, motor in all of women's college basketball. You never have to question whether or not she gave 100% effort in the game she just played. LSU is a top 3 team in the SEC, and Aneesah Morrow is a major part of that. Despite being undersized, she's able to dominate most of her post-player matchups. She's proof that being undersized doesn't matter when you want it more than everyone else. She's also a great defensive player as her athleticism and agility allow her to guard multiple positions. Madison Booker had an amazing freshman year that was overshadowed by the sheer insanity of Juju Watkins and Hannah Hidalgo. She was the Big 12 Co-Player of the Year, Big 12 Tournament MVP, and a second-team All-American. And this year has been just as great for her. Texas is currently the #1 team in the country, and she's a big reason why. What makes Booker special is that she isn't worried about efficiency at the expense of her team. She struggled shooting the ball against South Carolina and LSU, but she didn't let that bother her and made the big plays when they counted and led her team to victory. Her assists are down because of the return of Rory Harmon, but a result of that is her turnovers are down. The argument for Madison Booker being an All-American is easy. She's the best player on a team that's at the top of the best conference in women's basketball. LSU has no shortage of star power, and Flau'jae Johnson still continues to stand out. When you can be a star among stars, it goes without saying you're a special player. On top of being the leading scorer for LSU, she's an amazing defender as well. Flau'jae's combination of craftiness and athleticism make her an absolute nightmare for the defense. There isn't really any stopping her, you just have to hope she's off her game. What I'm very interested to see is what kind of tournament run Flau'jae Johnson has. She had a great sophomore season but turned up during March Madness. If she somehow is playing at an even higher level than she is now, this is a team no one wants to see in the tournament. Olivia Miles was a second-team All-American the last time she was healthy, and I think she ends up right back into the same spot. She's averaging a career high in points, field goal, and three-point percentage. Olivia has always been an incredible passer, but the massive improvement she made in her shooting ability completely changed her WNBA trajectory and has massively improved the spacing for Notre Dame. Her offensive game has virtually no weaknesses. She's one of the best passers in college basketball, has exceptional handles, is crafty when driving to the rim, and is a deadly off-the-dribble shooter. Her defense leaves more to be desired, but the offensive firepower she brings to Notre Dame, which has propelled them to one of the top teams in the country, is enough to be worthy of being an All-American. So to wrap up the second team, I have Sarah Strong, Aneesah Morrow, Madison Booker, Flau'jae Johnson, and Olivia Miles. But now I'll move on to the All-American first team, starting with Ta'Niya Latson. She got virtually no recognition during her freshman and sophomore season. Instead of complaining, she responded by getting even better. She's averaging a career high in points, rebounds, assists, steals, and field goal and three-point percentage. But the real difference this year is that her play is leading to meaningful winning. Florida State hasn't lost a single game this season when she has at least 5 assists, and I don't think that's a coincidence. She would have so many games in her first 2 years where she would score a bunch of points, but Florida State would still lose. But when she's combining high-level playmaking with her exceptional scoring talent, that's what has elevated her to a completely different status. There's not a single player that's generating as many points as Latson does for her team through her scoring and passing. I think the upset win against Notre Dame was the missing piece in terms of her being a first-team player. Florida State badly needed a win against a top-tier team, and they finally got it. Paige Bueckers is averaging 18.5 points per game, 5 assists and 2 steals while shooting 53% from the field and 41% from the three-point line. And people believe she's having a down year. That just shows how good she is. A down year for Paige is still better than most of the people in the entire country. Gianna Kneepkens is the only other guard who has been able to score on the same level of efficiency as Paige Bueckers. But the major difference is that Paige is a much better passer and defender. And that is what makes Paige so special. She can be anything you want her to be. She can play the role of a point guard, be a ball-dominant perimeter scorer, be an off-the-ball wing, and we even saw her play some power forward last year. Dunking on Paige has become the trendy thing to do, but at the end of the day, she's an absolute baller, and UConn wouldn't be nearly as good as they are with her as they would be without. If you don't believe me, just look at the 2022-2023 season when they lost in the Sweet 16 when she was out for the year. Juju went on a bad shooting slump in the middle of January to late February, but now she's back into top form. With the major performance and victory she had against UCLA, she has put herself back into the Player of the Year race. She's the only player in the entire country averaging at least 20 points per game while averaging at least 2 blocks and 2 steals. Hannah Hidalgo is the only guard who can provide the sheer dominance Juju does on both ends of the floor. I think by far the most overblown criticism is her efficiency. Is it something she needs to work on? Absolutely. But you're never going to see a high-usage guard who is an elite defender have crazy efficiency from the field. Juju doesn't have the luxury of an elite point guard who can make the game easier for her and set up good shots for her. If she had an Olivia Miles or Rory Harmon type point guard, she without a doubt be shooting a higher percentage from the field. Shooting only 42% from the field doesn't change the fact she's taking USC to heights they would never dream of without her. The USC and UCLA game may very well decide the National Player of the Year race. If Juju dominates UCLA again, I could totally see her stealing the award from the other 2 players I'm about to talk about. Hannah Hidalgo was a first-team All-American this year, and she'll easily be back on the team this year. She's second in the country in points per game, second in steals per game, and has made massive improvements to her three-point shooting. With the return of Olivia Miles, Hannah Hidalgo has taken the role of a scoring guard. It's basically the college version of Chelsea Gray and Jackie Young. While I love that she's taking the scoring mantle, I do wish she would go back to being a playmaker as well. Notre Dame as a team is a lot more dangerous when she's using her passing ability coupled with her scoring. I don't think it's a coincidence that in their 4 losses, she's only had a combined total of 9 assists. Hannah has been in a disgusting shooting slump since her game against Pitt. I think that will ultimately end up costing her the Player of the Year race, but she's easily a first-team All-American. The shooting slump she's in doesn't change the fact she outplayed Paige Bueckers, Madison Booker, and Juju Watkins in a head-to-head matchup. If Hannah gets back to how she was playing for the majority of the season, Notre Dame is still a strong competitor for the national championship. I said in the preseason that Lauren Betts in the Big Ten is completely unfair, and we're seeing the results of that. I recommend, if possible, that everyone go watch Lauren Betts in person. It looks even more ridiculous watching her play in person than it does on television. You have teams literally sending 2 or 3 defenders at her every possession, and they can't stop her from dropping 20 on their head. If she doesn't have a favorable position, she has no problems passing it the open teammate. On top of all that, she's by far the best interior defender in women's basketball. If UCLA doesn't drop more than 3 games, I think the voters would have a very hard time giving anyone else the award. And it would be well-deserved. The only negative has been her free throw shooting. She's shooting a higher percentage from the field than she is from the line, which shows how efficient she is, but at the same time, she has to improve from the free throw line. She's completely unstoppable on offense and will most likely win the National Defensive Player of the Year award. She's an incredible college player and is one of the best WNBA prospects, regardless of class. There was only one player that changed from my preseason first-team All-American predictions, and that was replacing Madison Booker with Latson. Booker has been great, but Latson leading the country in scoring at her efficiency is just too ridiculous to leave off her first team. I had no doubts about Lauren Betts making the first team, but I would be lying if I said I thought she would be the favorite to win National Player of the Year. And I would say Paige, Juju, and Hidalgo are performing exactly like I expected them to. But that's it for this video. What do you think about my predictions? Is there a player you think will be there instead? If so, who would you take out in place for them? I'd love to hear your thoughts.